Authenticity. That is something that it took me a while to fully grow into. Being a female in the engineering field, I feel like for many years I was trying to act like something other than what I was. I thought I was too feminine or too creative or too many things. And what I realized when I was a professor teaching all these amazing young people, especially young women, I was like, we need diversity in the engineering field. We need diversity in all fields. We need people to show up as authentically as possible so they can bring their own unique signature to everything that we do in this world. So I find myself really drawn to people who are just confident and authentic who they are, because you can feel it, you can sense it.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we have an amazing episode in store for you. This is going to be a very powerful and practical reviewing of a methodology that I think many leaders face, and we have a phenomenal, brilliant engineering genius to walk us through it with Erin Cox. We'll introduce you here in just a second. But today, if you're listening, my question for you is, do you ever face a situation where as a leader, you're dealing with a complex decision that does not have an easy answer? And it could be for yourself personally in your career. It could be a life situation. It could be something you're doing with, a couple of trusted partners. Maybe it's on a committee that you're working on. But when you're faced with these kinds of really difficult, complex decisions, we get stuck in this swirl. And, you're bouncing around the options and you're ping-ponging back and forth. And if you're in a committee, maybe you're pulling and jockeying for position. And so today we're going to share something that I had the great fortune to learn from my mentor, Tony Robbins. And we've got a phenomenal leader here who's also a really great friend who we got to use this with her. And while we've done this with hundreds of clients, not everybody wants to reveal to 20,000 of their closest friends what went down. And so at Brene Brown, Daring Greatly style, Erin is here with us to be able to walk through it for the benefit of all of our listeners. So with that, let me introduce you to Erin Cox. Erin is currently the Vice President of Northwest Water Resources Strategic Growth at Jacobs. As I mentioned, she's a powerful business woman. She's a talented engineer. She's a great representative out in the community and is just a delight to work with. So, Erin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. This is fun.
Well, Erin, you've got a business life. You're a mom. You're an author. You've got so many things going on. I've gotten to know you over the years, which has been such a privilege. But tell us a little bit about you. What are you doing currently in your career? What industry are you working in? What are the types of things you're wrestling with?
So I create strategy and I drive growth, and I work on where the business is going for one of the world's largest engineering firms called Jacobs. We have a strong presence here in the Pacific Northwest in the water industry. And my background is I am a biologist and an environmental engineer. So technically speaking, I get to work on projects related to sustainability and improving water quality and water resources, watershed restoration. But really what my position is tasked with is looking out into the future, trying to see where the industry is going, and then making sure that we have the right people and we are kind of ahead of the business with where our project work is going and what we want to try to pursue. It's a very competitive industry, and we have some of the best talent by far, but you really want to make sure that you are positioned to win the best projects. And we've done a really great job over the past few years at Jacobs.
Well, and water is such a crucial natural resource that is often taken for granted in the broader public. It's becoming more and more apparent how essential that is. And so being in a position where you got to have the best projects to recruit the best talent, and then the best talents help you recruit the best projects, right? So the strategic positioning that you're talking about here from a business perspective to make sure you're in the right place at the right time. So you guys have done really well with that. And you just spoke at a conference right? And so, would you mind just sharing what was the topic of your conference speech? I know I'm putting
Yeah,
you on the spot
actually,
here.
it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm working with the city of Nampa, Idaho, and we are constructing a really innovative constructed wetland to mitigate contaminants of emerging concern. And wetland technology is a really great way to improve water quality using natural processes. So you harness biology, but you make it more certain by adding some engineering to it so that you can get more I guess consistent treatment through the process. The great thing is that Nampa is going to be able to direct water directly from their treated wastewater effluent, or they can pull water out of Indian Creek, improve water quality, reduce water temperature through this wetland system. And that's really important because salmon and other salmonid species really need cold water. So we're really working to improve water quality. It's a way to provide water resilience for the future and make sure that they have permit compliance into the future as well. So it's a really innovative project, very exciting because other entities around the state are looking for innovative ways to improve water quality without having to use lots of pumps and like treatment facilities. So, I mean, it's a treatment facility, but it also is going to be absolutely this beautiful area that's going to have a walking trail around it and
Creation and restoration and so you are no stranger. My point with all of this is, you are no stranger to complexity, right? I mean, this is the intersection of technology and biology and business and industry and natural systems. I mean, you are no stranger to that. So, and so, how did you kind of get into this work? Let's go back to Erin in her 20s. Like, what got you on this path, and what kind of shaped your way of looking at problems and leadership?
Well, that's a really good question. I look back at where I grew up. I grew up on a lake that was really impaired from agricultural practices. And obviously I grew up in a farming community. I love the farming industry, but I just felt like there had to be ways that we could coexist more successfully, and protect water quality. The lake I grew up on was full of algae. Like during August, you couldn't even swim. It was terrible. So that kind of inspired what I decided to do. I went to college, got a degree in biology, realized I wanted to be able to design solutions. So I went on to graduate school, got a master's in environmental engineering and water resources. And so my career has been very exciting, working as a consultant for many years. I traveled around the country doing consulting work, solving very complex problems related to water resilience. So that's the quantity of water. We're really in a lot of water short areas out in the West, but also water quality. So water quality is my area of expertise. I did take quite a long hiatus from consulting, did something different for a while where I used my ability to speak and my passion for writing. And I switched gears and was a writer. I was able to publish a book. I was a motivational speaker when my kids were young, and it was just one of the best things I've ever done. That was a fantastic time in my life when like I said, my kids were young. I have 3 children. And then it somehow my career evolved to being an organization lead for a group called the Blue Zones, the places around the world where people live the longest.
Yeah, I didn't know that part. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I totally know about Blue Zones. Yeah.
I worked with the Blue Zones organization for a couple of years, and that was again, just an amazing experience. During that time, I started teaching as an adjunct professor at a local university. That led into being a professor for 6 years. And while I was a professor, I started working on my PhD so I could get full tenure. And I'm still working on it today because it takes a very long time when you have a full-time job.
Full-time job, and your mommy's so hard, and you're still traveling and speaking at conferences. Exactly. Like you're doing all the things. It takes a little longer sometimes.
It's a lot. But, my career, it's really interesting. If I could, give any advice to young people, it's just following your passion and really waiting for the right opportunities to come. But that doesn't mean that decision making is easy. So I'm excited to talk about that process today.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that slice. And, there's a theme across the guest on this show, Erin, where, as you look forward, it looks like a zigzag, jagged, broken path. But when you look back, it's a straight arrow to where you are now, and how you've assembled all the skills that you needed to really thrive in your current opportunities. And you're like, had I not done some of those things, I wouldn't have been as well positioned. I wouldn't have had as great a fulfillment having done them. So I think that's just like you said, for people earlier in their career, take note and know that it is okay to zig and zag to get to your ultimate destination. I mean, look at water, right? Water doesn't flow in a straight line, but it always finds its way from the mountains to the ocean. And sometimes it goes into really deep wells and marinates for a few thousand years, right? And then it comes out until it still gets there. But it always finds its way. So thank you for that, Erin. So yeah, today, super excited to be able to share with our listeners the decision juncture that you came to. And I recall you and I were in Leadership Boise. And I think at one of the sessions, you came up to me and you had this great idea. You said, "Lee, if I buy you a cup of hot chocolate, would you help me with this complex career decision?" And I thought that was a hell of a trade. So I was all in. So tell us about, where were you at in your career at that particular point? And that was about a year and change ago, I believe, if I remember correctly. So what was the dilemma that you were wrestling with at that time?
So I had been recruited to move to Boise, Idaho for a really great position with a smaller firm. And there were so many parts of the job that I absolutely loved. It was, building a team, a water resources team in the Pacific Northwest, some of the most incredible professionals I'd ever worked with. I really enjoyed many parts of the job. There were a few individuals that made some of that a little less enjoyable. And there were some challenging people that just kind of took a lot of the joy from my day-to-day life. And when I was in consulting before I took that hiatus to work with the Blue Zones and be a professor, I worked for actually a company called CH2M Hill that's now Jacobs. And I just always had such amazing colleagues. It was just such a healthy environment. I don't know how it is such a consistent thing, but I don't come across narcissists or bullies, or it's just not tolerated in that environment. And I was actually experiencing some microaggression. I wouldn't say straight up full up bullying exactly, but it was just kind of a toxic work environment.
Yeah, just kind of at the heels and, not in your direct sphere, but enough that it kind of made a little bit of an ick factor there, right?
Yes. And at this point in my career, I know I have a lot to share. I wanted to be able to use my skills and work in a place that just had a lot of positivity and where everybody was moving in the same direction, had each other's backs, very supportive, because I'd experienced it before. I knew what that felt like. But I did have a lot of great things happening at that position. But then I was recruited for the company I'd worked with before, and they offered me a really amazing opportunity. It was a substantial pay increase, a lot more visibility, very exciting. And then when I brought that to my current employer at the time, they matched the salary. They tried to do what they could to get me to stay. And they basically, they matched everything. So at that time, I was basically considering two different positions. One where it was a known situation. There were a lot of really good things about it, a lot of great people, a few very negative influences, or take this new position where there were a lot of unknowns, quite frankly. The company CH2M Hill had gotten purchased by Jacobs in the time I was gone. And Jacobs is a very large company. I didn't know what that would be like.
Yeah.
And then I was then recruited for a third position where the salary was actually even significantly higher than either of the first two. And that third position was, I would say it's a more speculative company that's trying to grow into the Boise market. I don't know a lot about that company. It's another very large company. Some great people, but they have no local experience in the water realm. So it would be really starting from scratch.
Startup mode, yeah.
And that can be really exciting, but I've done that before with new offices when I was at CH2M Hill. And it is a lot of work. And, there are some really entrenched, highly reputable local firms already here. So it would have been an uphill battle. So I basically had 3 different opportunities, different strengths for each one. They all had something really great about them. And 2 of them had just, complete unknowns, quite frankly. So
different levels of ambiguity, different pros and cons, right? And they're all, actively pursuing you, right? And so, it sounds like a great place to be. And I think some listeners are like, oh my gosh, I'm really feeling bad for this poor girl, right? People are throwing themselves at her, begging her. But it's like, whether the situation as a leader is like, hey, you've got a bunch of great options and you're not sure which is the right one for you. What the model we're going to go would just as well apply, Erin, if you're facing, 3 really terrible options that none of them you like. But the question is, how do you make the best out of a bad situation, right? It's the same pattern. It just, one definitely feels a little better.
Yeah. And at the time, honestly, I think it just felt overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I just remember reaching out to you because I admire you. I think you're awesome. And I thought, gosh, it'd be just nice to talk this through with somebody because I was so in the weeds. And depending on the hour, depending on the day, I was like, I am totally going this way. And then something would happen and I would be wanting to completely switch my mind. And then I had a deadline. The firms, they wanted to know so they could move forward.
Yeah.
So it was nice so I said, well, I'd like to give you a decision on Monday. I wanted to have some time to think about it. So you and I connected on I believe it was a Thursday or a Friday. And the process that you helped me go through was extraordinary. And I thought I was a good decision maker, but I'm telling you.
Well, you are. Yeah.
I wasn't doing a very good job at that time. I was kind of all over the place. But you really helped me do something that was very logical, but you tied in some of the intuitive thoughtfulness that is important to me.
Right? Yeah. How do you quantify emotions,
Yeah. I was really grateful for your help. It helped a lot.
Well, it was a joy to do that. And I want to highlight here, where you were in that moment. It's like you are intelligent. You're good at solving really complex problems. But then we all reach, and I encounter this myself too. My wife and I have had some really challenging life decisions that we had to make. And I was like, we're spinning and spinning. And I'm like, why are we not using the tools that, we've been given, so let's sit down and go through this and then boom. And that's the thing is to be able to make a decision with confidence, maybe with a little bit of data, if you have it, and with a sense of peace, right? That's because what you described, I think is exactly what leaders feel in that moment, right? You're pinging back and forth between options and you're like, this is obviously the one, right? And then, nope, this is the one. And so you're, and your head's just looping on it. And there's a sense of overwhelm or maybe anxiety, maybe not so much in your case, but I could see in other folks where, and all of that is just crowding it. And you end up making a knee-jerk reaction decision versus a powerful, purposeful, peaceful decision. And I think that's the thing we're trying to differentiate here for leaders.
Absolutely. And I love the peaceful part because sometimes when I make decisions at the end of it, I still have that sense of discomfort. Did I make the right decision? Continually second guessing what you decided to do. And I can tell you, I went through this process. And when I made the decision, I'm like, I'm going to sleep on it and see how I feel tomorrow. It was the same. And it was just kind of done. It's I made my decision. And it made it so much easier to go and tell all these people that I really cared about that I was going to be leaving them. That was really hard for me to do. I don't like letting people down. I don't like delivering negative news, although I've gotten better at that as I've gotten older. But yeah, it was hard, but it made it easier because it was just this clear decision. The opportunity for me is better here. It just gave me, and I came up with the talking points and I was able to deliver that negative news and then kind of move forward and celebrate the decision I'd made and get super excited about it without any of the negative baggage of, should I have, done this or not? It was just okay, I'm moving forward. This is the right thing to do. I feel completely confident.
Good. Yeah. That peaceful, powerful, purposeful, right? And you were able to nail it. And then you were, as susceptible to being persuaded, by the snake charmers, out there one way or the other, right? And because they're, good on them. They got to do what they got to do to, make the best case. But it's just like, if you're like, oh, wait a second, I don't let that person down. And then like, oh, okay, I've got a threat. I'm still in this fight, right? And then you back down from the decision, and then the spin continues. And that's, at some point, that's just not good for anybody.
Right.
Fantastic. Well, perfect setup. I couldn't have asked for a better summary. And I think if you're not relating to what Erin's describing right now, then you need to make your way to the nearest emergency room and get a blood transfusion, because you are not alive. All right. Because anybody over the age of 5 has been in a situation where they're feeling pulled in multiple directions and they're not quite sure what they want to do, and they're ping-ponging around. And so absolutely, that is all relatable. And that is not a sign of weakness or a lack of intelligence. It's just a place that we find ourselves in as leaders. So there's a step that I didn't have to do much with you on this particular step, Erin, but I want to summarize it a little bit for our listeners, that when you're about to use the process that we're going to describe here in just one hot second, you got to be in the right state to do this process effectively. Like, it's a great tool, it's a great methodology, but if you're not in the right state, then it will be of limit to you. And what I mean by that is, if you're in a state of like, you're feeling so anxious and so overwhelmed and so stressed and depressed about the decision you're about to make, you're cutting off your air supply, and you're limiting your access to your brain and the resources and the creativity that you need. So being in a state where you're open to what the possibilities would be is kind of essential. And, what I'll share with folks, and again, we were there in like 5 seconds, so it wasn't a big part of our conversation. But for other folks, being in the right state might mean that you've got to change your physiology, right? Before you have this conversation or you do this, you maybe need to take some good deep breaths. Maybe you need to stand with the superhero pose for a second, right? With your fist on your hips and your shoulders back. Maybe you need to do, clap your hands or do something to kind of like, okay, interrupt that pattern of anxiety. And then the other piece, and I think you know this as a motivational speaker, right? Anxiety and gratitude cannot coexist. So getting your mind in the story to be like, oh my gosh, this is a really difficult decision. There's no easy answer here. I'm going to let somebody down. I'm probably going to end up homeless and dead and broke and left and abandoned. And like, if that's your story that's going through your head in that moment, right, you will not be able to have the clarity you need, right? So you got to ask, in your case, Erin, it's like, wow, yeah, this is going to be difficult, but how great is it to have such great options? Right? To be in a position in my career where I get to choose, right? Or if somebody's facing a really difficult set of decisions, to say, none of these are good options. I hate all of them, but by golly, I'm going to do it based on what I choose, and I decide what's best for me versus somebody else deciding for me. So that might be the story. And then the last piece is the focus. And what are you focusing on when you're getting ready to make that decision? And part of it is, you got to focus on the decision. You can't be distracted. Oh, I got the laundry. I got to go pick up this. I got to go do that. I got to, go to this meeting. Give yourself the space to focus for half a minute on this important decision without any other distraction. When you do those 3 things, get your physiology, get your story, and get your focus in the right place, now this tool will work. And in your case, like I said, Erin, you came in and you're well trained from an emotional intelligence perspective. So it wasn't too hard for you, but I thought that was important to mention for other folks, to say you've got to get yourself in that right state of mind. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that step?
Well, I think part of it for me was my life can be pretty exhausting. And I think the time I was allotting to this decision was usually at the end of the day when I was way too tired. And
Yeah.
it just felt overwhelming. And I remembered you saying, do this when you're in a good mind frame. And so I do remember one night just being like, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to wake up early tomorrow morning, get myself a good cup of coffee, and do this when I'm in a clear mind. And that was really helpful. And then the other piece of it is starting the decision process with gratitude. I was aware when I really looked at things objectively, like, wow, I have 3 like tremendous opportunities. None of them are bad. And that actually, at first, I saw it as kind of an overwhelming piece of it, but I was like, any of these decisions will work out. That's relieving in a way. Like, you can't really make a wrong decision here. I know that's not always the case, but I think when decisions are difficult, a lot of it is because they all could have good outcomes. And, that almost makes it harder, because it's like, well, you just don't know exactly what the good and the bad will be. So you're kind of speculating, but when they're all good, that can be hard. Or when they're all bad, conversely, I imagine.
Conversely, yeah. I mean, but I think of some of the heroic, stories when there's, three soldiers pinned down and, option A is death, option B is death, and option C is death. And so you're like, okay, well, let's take death out of the equation because that's going to happen no matter what. The question is, how are we going to die? And by golly, we're going to do it with honor. We're going to go out there, la, 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 and just going at it. Or we're going to, cower and just let them until they overwhelm us. So it's like, some of the most heroic moments in history come. And then suddenly it's like, wait a minute, look at that. Because we were so courageous and purposeful and at peace with the outcome, we actually overcame ridiculous odds and we lived. So it's like, it almost kind of, the way you make the decision and how you execute on that decision can in and of itself amplify the outcomes of that decision. So I don't think it's just always a net calculation. Perfect. Well, really good. Well, let's get into the specific method here a little bit because I know we built this up and people are excited to hear about it. So I'll do a real quick summary and then we'll just walk through step by step some of the elements that you came up with in yours, Erin, so people get a real life example right away. So the model is OOC EMR. Like I said, it's a model that Tony Robbins developed. He's published about this. I got personally trained with him through the Platinum Partner program, so I am not taking credit for this. I am standing on the shoulder of a giant, and I'm a little pipsqueak on that shoulder. But the degree to which we share great techniques, right, is like, I don't care if something's 10,000 years old, right? If it worked great and somebody shares it with me, I'm grateful that they shared it with me because I otherwise wouldn't have known it. So OOC EMR, it stands for, in short, outcomes. And you want to start with those. We'll talk about why. But what are the key outcomes that we're looking to optimize? What are the options that we have available to us? And then how do we look at the consequences, right? How do we look at the consequences associated with each one of those options? Now, when you're hearing this, you're just kind of, well, I was kind of doing that. And what you'll see is different as usually we do is we focus on the options first, and then we do a pros and cons, and it's just a mixed bag. And you're like, well, but there's this, well, but there's this. And at any given moment, certain emotions will rise to the top or trigger certain things, and will steer you one way or the other without really being a holistic decision. So we start with outcomes, we identify options, and then we quantify the consequences. Then we evaluate, that's the E, we evaluate what those are, and then we mitigate. And that's a key step that also we don't often do. And the mitigate is looking at, well, the bad parts in option A, how can we mitigate those, right? In your case, it was some of those not so great relationships that were there. Was there ways that we could buffer or mitigate that? Is there maybe something only has a mediocre positive side? Was there a way to amplify that? And that gives you another couple of options that you can then run through that consequence and evaluate cycle again. And then at the end, you're able to look at it holistically and say, is it an yes or is it a no? And you resolve. That's the R, right? You sleep on it. You make a resolution. You burn all the other bridges, and you go forward with peace and with purpose. So that's the model at a high level for our listeners. But let's dive into each one of these. In your case, Erin, to make this real. So in your case, like you said, you started with two options. We started with, it's like, do I stay or do I go? Right? Was kind of the and that's the classic dilemma. Tony Robbins likes to say, no options is imprisonment. Two options is a dilemma. Only three options was where real choice starts to happen. So you started with stay or go. Then it was, current role versus new role. Then they countered it. So then you had two options. Then you got this third option, right? And so that's where you were spinning. And we said, hey, wait a second. Let's take a step back and let's ask the Spice Girl question. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want, right, Erin? So what were the outcomes that you were seeking for at this time in your life? So what were a couple of those?
That was one of my favorite parts of this whole exercise, Lee, because it forced me to step back and think really big. Like, what do I really want? And I've actually used that in other parts of my life subsequently. But, when I think about what I really want, I want a job. I have, 23 years of experience, professional experience, and experience that when I was a professor, I got to teach. And I love doing that, but I wasn't actually taking my knowledge and skills and being out there, putting them into play and making an actual difference in the world. And so I wanted to be able to use my speaking, my technical expertise. It being an inspirational leader is something that's really important to me. I wanted to be able to build a team. I wanted to be able to work on the biggest, most impactful projects. And when I tapped into that one, that's really one of the things that started to be a differentiator, because the company I was working for did in the water resources realm a certain size of project, a certain type of client. At Jacobs, we do huge projects, we do large scale, we do very impactful projects. And that was really important to me, because I want to be able to look back at my career and think, wow, the work I did really helped make the world a better place. It improved water quality in measurable ways. It, created more sustainability and resilience in our water resources. And so that was actually really helpful. And then also thinking about what I really, really want. I want to go to work every day with people that I trust, that I enjoy, that I have good rapport with, that I feel like they have my back because I will have their back. I just, the people I work with in the actual environment make a big difference. So, if I stayed where I was, again, there were great people, but just thinking about the,
more of a mixed bag, right? Versus, more of an aligned culture in that case, right? Yep.
And feeling like people really have my back, I realized I hadn't even, I guess it was something I'd taken for granted. When I was a faculty member, my other professor partners, we so had each other's back. Like it was just this great thing. It made you feel like, it was a really positive partnership, and we looked out for each other. And I knew that in any kind of situation, like if we were advocating for higher salaries, I knew that my boss at that time, the department chair, would just really advocate for me. And that meant a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if I recall, wasn't there also, there was a life balance, I think, question to this as well too, right? Because you were trying to do your PhD, your kids are at, pivotal stage and their upbringing. So I think wasn't that one of the categories, or am I mixing you up with somebody else?
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Building a new business from scratch. I'd done it before. It is really demanding. It consumes you. I did that for an office of CH2M Hill years ago in Florida. And I just know what it takes to build a new office. It's amazing, but you have to be willing to put in more. I mean, I put in long hours, but it's just a different
energy and a different level of uncertainty too. Whereas, long hours that are predictable are different than, inconsistent hours that are unpredictable. And in a startup mode, you often have a lot more of that unpredictability. That could be part of it as well.
Yep. And just my kids' ages, I have, I'm a single parent. I have 3 kids. My oldest is a senior this year. And I knew I want to have the right work-life balance where I can be a very present parent this year. And I'm so grateful, because it really is something that I've been able to do, and I want to be able to do the whole year. My kids need me.
Yeah, no, they do, and they certainly benefit from that presence. So, but did everybody notice when Erin was describing that, how her energy levels just shot up, right? When she started talking about, and we weren't sure which option. And at the time, I mean, we're going back a year now, so in retrospect, it'll look fairly obvious what the decision was. But at the moment, there was a lot of uncertainty, and you didn't know. It's like, well, I thought maybe it might be a better culture over there. I thought maybe this, but you didn't really know, and so. Yeah, that uncertainty discounts it and all this, but your energy level shot up. And so let's just summarize it here. Let's just say there was 3. And we're not saying that these are the right 3 outcomes for everybody. These were the outcomes for Erin Cox in 2023 at that point in her career, right? That was what was right for her. You go at a different time era, right? Even for the same person, you'll get 3 different outcomes. That's totally fine. But the question is, what's right for you? So let's say that there was, greatest impact with larger projects was one outcome. You wanted more of that. You wanted a culture that had a sense of people have your backs, right? And then we wanted to have a reasonable work-life balance, so you can be present as a mom to your amazing children in this critical stage that they're at. So those are her three outcomes. Now, the other thing that we did in this step is we also prioritize those three outcomes. And you might have four, you might have five. Try not to have 27, right? Like it's, 2 to, 5-ish is the number of outcomes you're looking for here. And so we wanted to be able to also rank those outcomes. So for you, Erin, and the way we do, there's a couple different ways you can do it, but it's just like, okay, let's say that you could have the most impactful role, but you would have almost no time with your children versus you'd have tons of time with your children, but maybe the impact is more of a, moderate level. If you had to choose between those two options or those trade-offs, which would be the bigger one for you? And what was it for you at that time, Erin?
It was, and it always will be, my family.
Bingo, right? For you, right? For somebody else, you're like, screw the kids, right? I got a great nanny, right? But, right, it's all good. So it's not right or wrong. It's what's right for you. So Erin's number one was, the role could not be so consuming that it would have impacted your ability to show up as an awesome mom. And then so between biggest impact and a culture of alignment, again, we have great impact, but it's a little bit of dog eat dog, right? Not totally terrible toxic, but just you're going to have some snipers. Or golden culture, super cohesive, but we're working on mediocre to moderate level projects. What was higher between those two for you?
The culture.
Culture. All right.
The culture.
Now notice this, you guys. When she said it, what did she start with? Right? She started with, I wanted fulfillment, I wanted impact, I wanted to leverage my skills. And then, then I also wanted a great culture. And then, there's a work-life balance. That's important too. Right. But so sometimes the order it comes out is not the order of priority. Right. When you reflect on it, you're like, maybe it's because that one's so important and embedded, but it's quieter. Right. And so doing those comparisons helps you get it. So her three outcomes in priority order are, reasonable work-life balance, strong culture, and greatest impact. Right. And ideally, you'd like the highest scores on all three of those. But if push came to shove, she's clear. Now, because we're, biologists and engineers, I was a bio major as well too, Erin. I don't know if I ever shared that with you. Biologists just understand the world, don't we? So let's put those in a spreadsheet model, and we'll upload this template for those of you who can get access to the show notes. Let's put those in the left column, right? So those are the three outcomes in that priority order. So let's now go to the options. So step 2, we've got clarity of the outcomes. They're weighted. Options. So nominally, it's obvious. You got three options, right? Stay where you are with the in-place raise and additional accommodations that they were going to make. Option 2 was the new gig with the old firm that you were familiar with, but had gone through some changes, so there's some uncertainty. And then the third option was a new one with another large firm, but totally startup mode, right? So those were your three options nominally. Is that a fair summary there, Erin?
I'd say that is accurate.
Okay, good. Those were our three options. Let's now go to the consequences step. All right. So, what is the scoring, so to speak, of these? So for the in-place option A, let's call that option A, how did that relate to your ability to have a good work-life balance? And what we did for this one is we said, score it on a +10, right? Absolute ideal work-life blend in terms of the demands, all the way to a -10, which would be completely disastrous, terrible, awful. 0 being kind of like, kind of in between somewhere, right? So a +10 to a -10. So let's just do a couple of these. So for the first in-place option, how was the work-life balance on a -10 to a +10 score?
I gave it a +5. And, because it was known, I knew what the work-life balance was. And it was good. I had a lot of control over my schedule. I had freedom to schedule meetings when I wanted to. I could work from home sometimes. I was in the office. And that's something that company prided themselves on. And it was pretty darn good. So I had no real complaints.
Yeah, no, solid there, right? And again, the known factors, hear that, right? Now let's go to what ended up becoming Jacobs, but it was that the new old option. And what was that on a -10 to +10 on the work-life balance?
I gave it the same ranking because, again, I knew that I would have a lot of control over my schedule, and I knew I would have the same level of professional flexibility. I thought maybe with some of the demands, it might be a little more intense, but it felt to me like I would have as much control as I had in my current job. So I gave it the same.
Okay, yeah, that could be a +5, and maybe you could have done a +4 there just to add in a little dash of uncertainty, right?
And I
Uh,
might have, to be honest.
I
I don't have the actual paperwork with me anymore, but I actually did go through this exercise. And
yes, yes.
I remember thinking because of the unknown factor, it probably wasn't scored the exact same.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a tip. I mean, you can score things exactly the same if they truly are completely interchangeable. But because we have such this nice, lovely dimension of -10 to +10, try to make differentiators where you can, even if it's a little bit, right? And then the third option on the work-life balance, what did you score that one?
-5 or -10. I mean, I gave it a negative score just because I had experienced building a new business. I know the demands and how you feel more pressure to attend things that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. Um, yeah, I just knew it was going to be a tremendous amount of life force and late hours. And
Great, great. And then you did the same for the culture, and then you did the same for the contribution, right? And by the way, a little callback for our listeners. When you're looking at the outcomes, you will also often find that they are essentially permutations of the 6 fundamental human needs. So we covered that in episode like 6, I think it was. So go back to that if you're wondering, like, what do we mean by outcomes? Go check those out. But you're hearing, right, connection, contribution, and well, 2 connections and then 1 contribution. Those are Erin's clearly her top 2 fundamental needs. So, and then growth is a big one for her as well too, but they just didn't happen to show up on this particular question because she knew she was going to get growth in all 3 options. So little psychology going on there, Erin. I hope you don't feel too revealed. But you can just see it. It's like it's right there. So you did each of those, and we won't go through all of them, but you can imagine on the impact one, one of them had more of a higher plus, the other one had more of a, maybe a 0 to a smaller plus, right? And so she's done this math, right? And that's the consequence step, right? It's quantify it using some kind of relative scale. Right. So then the evaluation step, there's kind of 2 ways to do this. One is kind of the raw score where you just simply add it up. You're like, okay, so option A had a +5 on work-life balance. I'm just going to make up numbers for you here, Erin. It was maybe it was a -1 on culture and it was a +2 on impact, let's just say, right? So you can tally those up. And then for the second option and the third option, you just add them up, right? And if you're like one is like, well, that one is a +20 and this one's like a -4. You're like, why are we talking about this, right? But what often is the case is, maybe one that had a +10 on one of the items maybe was only a +1 or was maybe even a minus something on another item. So that's what gives you this mixed bag, right? Which makes it not as easy of an answer. Maybe there's uncertainty, like we've talked about, that makes it a little bit more kludgy. Now, if you really want to geek out, and you didn't have to do this, but if you really want to geek out in this, you can also give it a little bit of weighting, right? Where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to assign, of the outcomes, maybe I give, say, 40% to the first criteria. Maybe then I do, 30% to the second criteria and 30% to the last criteria. So I'm giving it some weighting. So you can get fancy if you want, mathematically. But at this point, you've got an evaluation of the 3 known options, and you've got one that, 1 or 2 that maybe sticks out a little bit higher, and then maybe one that's kind of like a laggard, right? So that's where we're at in the evaluation step.
Well, I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit more about, I did remember adding the salary into it.
Oh, that's right. So you end up being like, well, money matters here.
So I think you should bring that in because that was a big factor and it did change. It didn't really sway it.
Yeah. So maybe, and I think that's useful. It's like we lay this out as a algorithm, OOC EMR, but along the way you're like, oh, wait a second, I'm not accounting for X, right? And so maybe you throw in and say, hey, financially lucrative, maybe that's another outcome, right? And that speaks to significance, it speaks to your certainty, it speaks to also your ability to contribute to other parts of your life. And so you're like, but was that your high? Was that a new highest one? Like I'm going for the highest bidder, or was that maybe in the middle of the pack, or was it your 4th outcome? How did you prioritize that new outcome?
I believe that it was just an additional outcome. I didn't weight it. But if I had weighted it, like if as a single parent, I decided I just need to go make the most money, it would have changed everything. So I added it because that third opportunity that had the most uncertainty around everything else was significantly higher salary, which they were doing because, they needed to do that to try to bring in some talent to help build their business. And they knew I could do it. So that definitely kind of threw things off. But then I also did think about other things like just the financial stability of the companies, which one's going to do better for the long run, which one had a more generous bonus structure. One of them was employee owned. Two of them were publicly traded. Like there were a lot more things that I added because they all contributed to the decision-making process. And yeah, so it definitely ended up being a little more complex. I mean, those first three that we discussed were definitely the top things, but
drivers, yeah.
Because it was a hard decision, I wanted to add the nuance of the finances.
So if you find that two of them are kind of coming up a jump ball, right, then you're like, let's go to the next level outcome. Let's add another outcome. Start until we get to that differentiator. And I love, Erin, because our company's employee owned now. And we've had employees who have left for the shiny, immediate salary, but did not have as lucrative as a retirement plan, weren't ESOP, they were more volatile. So it was good while the getting was good, and then it evaporated, and then it was like rut-row. All of a sudden, so when you say financial stability, it's important to look at the total package, right? It's
Definitely.
not, top line take home pay. You got to think about all of those things. And maybe you separate those out, right? Maybe you have local salaries one, and then, the fact whether it's employee owned versus, publicly traded, maybe that's another fact. So again, you decide what's right for you for your evaluation.
Yep. I even added office location because two of them are downtown, which is a location I love. I enjoy working. And one of them was in a out on the edge of town in a much less favorable location, in my opinion. And that factored in too, because, a place that you're going every day or most days of the week, obviously I work from home sometimes, but that they all played a factor. And honestly, I think I kept adding a few more criteria as I went along because I kept thinking of more things. But the exercise itself is what forced me to think of these additional factors, like what really plays into my, my work satisfaction. We spend so much of our time and sometimes our best energy at our workplace. So it needs to be something that, the whole package needs to be evaluated.
Yeah. And again, if you were just looking at the options, you would just ping for it like, oh, but that's got a better commute, but that's got a better lunchroom, but that's got a better view, but that's got a nicer office, but that's got a, and you would just do, and it'd be like a ping pong. Anytime a thing got added, it would just knock something else out, where this is additive, right?
And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, totally. That's what we all do, right? So now you're at this great place where maybe there's two of them that are rising to the top. But now before we just make the call, we want to do that mitigation step, right? So that's the M. And mitigation, amplification is kind of both sides of it. So you're like, okay, this one maybe has a crappier commute, right? Well, is there a way that I can negotiate more work from home days? Or this one, they were going to give me a great office. Is there a way I can negotiate to get a better office? Or, this one, the salary's not as great. Could I counter and ask for just a little bit more, or shift some of it to be more bonus based versus salary based, right? So there's things that it's like, these are not absolutes and they're not impervious. You have a chance to roll the dice and flex a little bit here and say, hey, how could I, for the one that had some of the culture issues, it's like, well, hey, could I maybe have an intervention with that person? Could I get a reason, people to say basically, hey, don't mess with Erin, leave her alone, right? Could we reduce that kind of, prickliness of that particular relationship? And then suddenly, man, now this is a grand slam, right? Like this is, I have certainty, I have control, I like where it's at, the pay's reasonable, the impact's good, if I could just deal with Tom, who's driving me nuts, right? Suddenly that thorn comes out. And so these are all mitigation strategies. And what I often find here is that sometimes the mitigations themselves create new permutations of options, right? And you're like, well, what if I did a little bit of that and a little bit of that, right? Now, in this case, obviously, you couldn't work part-time for two employers, but there's some new ways that you can negotiate and say, hey, can we make option B really option B prime? That adds the value. So what was something that you mitigated as you were going through this between those two leading contenders?
Well, interestingly, like the scenario that you described, like mitigating that original position did happen to some degree. And then I also used that third position with the highest salary to negotiate a higher offer at the middle one. So it honestly was kind of an amazing part of this whole process because it did help me. That step helped me think, well, gee, why wouldn't I leverage this opportunity at the other ones?
Yeah.
And, quite frankly, the first one had already, gone up, I think, as much as they were willing to. And then, but the second one was willing to go up more because I was just negotiating. And honestly, at the seniority level that I am, that's expected. So
yeah, it's almost like if you didn't do it, you're like, oh man, is this the right person? If you're going to be leading business development strategy, like you need to be able to negotiate, right? That's an important skill. So I think that's another thing too, is I think some people have a story that to negotiate is somehow, greedy or mean or just, and it's just like, I'm just asking, right? It's just like they're inviting you, with an offer. That doesn't mean you have to jump ship and do what they say. Just you can invite them. Doesn't mean they have to say yes, right? It's an invitation, not an obligation. So good on you for going for that. And they can say no. They're like, no. You're like, okay, well now I understand what my options are. Now you can make an informed choice. And maybe you say, I still want that, even at the lower price. It's all good, right? It's all up to you. So now you've negotiated, you've done some things to really optimize your situation. There is one option that is really starting to just pull ahead of everything else. And suddenly that confidence, that calm, that peace you were describing started to settle in. So when did that happen for you? And how did that lead to your resolve?
Well, honestly, it happened before I even negotiated the higher salary. I mean, it was it was interesting. I did the calculations. I added those additional criteria, and there was an even more clear winner than I originally thought. And so even with other negotiations and other factors, it was pretty clear to me. And then I still thought, well, maybe I should still sleep on it and just make sure.
I know. I think that that is highly advisable, right? Do the intellectual, do the emotional, but you got to sleep on it to let your spirit marinate and come back with an answer. And in the tribunal of, spirit, mental and emotional, I know who my Chief Justice is. So I look to the spiritual and I need to sleep on it to let that Chief Justice do his job.
Yep.
So good on you.
And then the next morning it was like, well, okay. It was actually much easier. Like the anticipation of letting people down is easier than the actual act of letting people down, I discovered. So I just ripped off the Band-Aid. I made the calls, pretty matter of fact. And I think they were like, well, we're really sorry. We're sad to see this happen, but they respected it, everybody. And, we're still on great, we have great relationships. I have great relationships with all those people. I left on very positive terms.
Small industry. Yep, exactly.
So I felt good about it. And even the one that the other one, when I turned down the third position, they were like, well, we knew it was a long shot, but, thank you for considering.
Can't blame us for trying.
Yeah. And every once in a while, I still go, I wonder if I made the right decision. But like 99.9% of the time, there's still days where you're like, well, maybe I should have stayed, because I see former colleagues that I loved working with. But overall, it's just been a great move for my, my professional growth, the opportunities that I get to have, and very, very positive work environment. I have those colleagues that have my back, and it feels really good.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, I mean, this is such a great example, and this is a story I've heard hundreds of times, and it's like, and like you said, when you're delivering the message, I loved how you described that, and that, you could speak to the person and say, hey, I am really grateful for the offer you've given me here. I'm honored. I'm means a lot to me. It's not what's right for me. So when you're delivering that message with that level of confidence, you can be so respectful, right? And just drenched in gratitude, and they know, there's like, hey, you did all you could. It wasn't the right one for me. And then they get to walk away also feeling a sense of peace, versus that whiny man be like, well, I don't know, it is so hard, and I feel like I have to do this one, so I'm sorry. Like, oh my God, nobody wants that outcome, right? They're just like, okay, it leaves them wondering, is there something more they could have done? And it also makes them be like, why did we chase you in the first place? Right? And so doing it with confidence, doing it with gratitude, doing it with respect helps all the parties that were involved in that process leave the table feeling a little better. Now, somebody might be buttered, somebody might be upset, whatever, let them go. But you did the best you could in that situation.
Well, and it helps you make decisions clearly and then act with integrity. That's how I want to show up in the world. Yes. I think that's how most people want to, but unless you've done the hard work to make a clear decision, sometimes you may not. So I think this process just really helps you just have the clarity to be in integrity with your, because you've made this decision with such a robust process to make sure you are in alignment with your integrity. So it's a much easier thing to deliver with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, today we've talked about it in the context of a career decision, right? I mean, you're really essentially doing this all the time when it comes to watershed restoration options, right? You're like, okay, what are we trying to do? Well, you said it earlier, right? I just want to call back a little bit. You're like, what's the quantity of, the water? What is the clarity and the quality of the water? And what are the recreational potential components? And how feasible is the technology? And what's the budget? So, right? Those are all the outcomes. Right. And then your options are, we put them in tanks and we use chemicals. Option B is we use a blend of biologically enhanced engineered watersheds. Option C is we just flush it into the river and let it be for the best. Right. And then you can evaluate those different environmental restoration. It's the same model.
It
right.
Is.
And you're mitigating it. Right. We call it environmental mitigation. You're doing OOC EMR, and then you're saying this is what we're going. And there's no right, perfect answer. There's no easy one that's, in this. I think the problem we want to avoid is this, what I call the MPPU, the mythical parallel perfect universe, right? When you're comparing, somewhere out there is a free option that does everything we want tomorrow perfectly, or somewhere out there's the perfect job that has no downside, that pays me $1 billion an hour, that allows me to not actually ever work, and I just spend time with my kid. Like that MPPU, that's not one of the options. Get that off the table, and let's do the best that we can. But sometimes, when it's closer to home, maybe it's a relationship, or maybe it's a business decision or whatever, having a tool like this to help us get our thinking out and in front of us so we can make an informed decision. Super helpful. Super helpful.
Yeah. And by the way, we do have a decision support process that we use for technical decisions. It's called MODA, Multi-Objective Decision Analysis. And it helps our clients, develop criteria with which they want to evaluate projects, because they have to, they've got limited funds and they've got to figure out, what's going to work best. And a big part of it, if it's a well-run city, is the public's perspectives on things and the return on investment. But yeah, it's so true. And sometimes it's easy for people to not use these really robust processes in their own lives when that's really the most important. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, one last thing I do want to mention is this notion of I think it's the 40-70 rule. And Scott Waldron introduced it to me from one of the authors of a book I'd read, but I'd forgotten this module. I think maybe it's Atomic Habits. I can't remember exactly the source, but it's that notion that, if you have less than 40% of the information, that might be a little too hasty of a decision. You might need to do a little more discovery, right? If you have more than 70% of the information really certain, you're probably taking too long to make the decision, right? Now, in your case, you had, easily, 60 to 80% for most of the factors you were evaluating because you'd worked with them before or you knew through the grapevine. So that didn't, and you had a deadline. It was like Monday's a deadline. But I'll just add that for those that are facing other types of decisions, choosing to not make the decision in and of itself is a decision, and it should be one of the options you put in your column, right? What if I don't decide right now? What if I give it another 6 months and reevaluate, right? I mean, it's like, well, that's an option too, but score it. And because not making decision has opportunity costs, right? They're not free. And waiting is wait is a 4-letter word in our company. It's like, so if I'm gonna delay the decision, I'm gonna make the decision that I'm gonna reevaluate in 6 months. I am not waiting for 6 months to see how I feel. I'm making a decision to make a new decision in 6 months. Those are two totally different energies, because maybe I'm not at that 40% threshold of the information I need. I need to do a little discovery. So again, your case, not so much, but I'm trying to just flesh this out for everyone. Well, Erin, holy cow, this might be one of our longer podcasts, but I have a sinking suspicion this episode will probably be one of the most watched and probably one of the most shared episodes. So thank you for making a big impact, I think, in our corner of the world by sharing your story. This was incredibly helpful.
Well, I am glad that all the support and advice that you offered me for, no cost, you did it as a friend. I'm now able to
pay cup of hot chocolate. No, there was a monetary value associated with it. Now seeing how good of a negotiator you are and how much they were paying you, maybe I should have negotiated for more, right?
Heck yeah. Well, honestly, though, it's really a great process, and I benefited so much from it. And I'm happy to be able to share it with others because, what you provided for me was so helpful and beneficial. And I'm really excited that you're, able to support lots of other people out there making tough decisions.
Well, we'll keep doing it. We're unleashing leaders, one or two leaders at a time here. Well, Erin, where can folks find out more about you? And tell us the name of your book, for crying out loud. Don't tease.
Well, okay. So my website is in flux right now, but erinday.com is where everything is going to be in the near future. I'm actually going back to my maiden name.
Oh, good for you.
Because I'm not going to finish my PhD. So Cox is my married name, and I'm no longer married. So I'm going back to my maiden name, Erin Day. But right now you can find me at Erin Cox in a lot of places on Instagram. I believe it's Erin Day Cox. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's always a great place to find me. I think it's under Erin Day Cox. Facebook, all the regular places, but hopefully in the next year, I'll have better platforms. But they'll always be there.
And the name of your book was?
One Hot Mama, The Guide to Getting Your Mind and Body Back After Baby. You can find that on Amazon.
One Hot Mama. Excellent. I love it. Yeah, I know you're great about wholesomeness and fitness as well. I still got to connect you and Krista. You guys, I definitely would jive on that topic as well. Well, Erin, thank you again for the generous sharing of your time for our listeners and the vulnerability and courage that you've shared it with it. And I'm so glad to see that your career just continues to rocket. You continue to be just a beacon of hope and value and impact in our community. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks, Lee. This was fun.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.